I've always carried the assumption that music exists in some pure, untouchable realm. We are taught that frequencies are natural constants, discovered rather than invented, and that tuning is simply the art of aligning instruments with a mathematical truth that existed before humans, before orchestras, and before the first note was ever played. But that assumption shattered within the first hour of research into concert pitch standardization. When you ask when 440 Hz became the universal reference frequency, and when you trace who made that decision and why, you encounter a pattern, not evolution, not artistic consensus, but a sudden, coordinated shift imposed during a very specific window of history. This wasn't about music, it was about something else entirely. The decision happened in London, 1939. An international conference gathered to settle the question of concert pitch. The official record states that 440 Hz was chosen as a practical compromise between various regional standards that had drifted over the previous century. France had used 435 Hz since 1859. The United States had adopted 440 Hz for military bands, and Germany experimented with even higher pitches. The conference supposedly brought order to chaos. But here is what the official record doesn't emphasize. Joseph Goebbels, Nazi Germany's Minister of Propaganda, attended through representatives. He had a documented interest in acoustics and the psychological effects of sound. The German delegation pushed aggressively for 440 Hz in 1939, with war imminent and propaganda operations reaching unprecedented sophistication. They succeeded. Within months, the recommendation spread through institutional decree. Instrument manufacturers received the standard, orchestras were instructed to retune, and the shift was eventually ratified as ISO 16. Every major orchestra, every instrument factory, and every recording studio on Earth converted. Ask yourself how that happens, how an entire art form that existed for millennia with regional variation suddenly unifies around a single frequency within 16 years. Musical tradition doesn't usually bend to industrial convenience. Artists resist homogenization, yet with concert pitch, resistance was minimal and compliance was total. Try to find the 1939 conference proceedings, the full minutes, or the research presented to justify 440 Hz over alternatives. You'll find citations in academic papers, but the actual documents are remarkably difficult to access. University libraries point to secondary analyses. Archives note that records were lost or dispersed during the war. The chain of custody breaks right where you would expect transparency. During this same period, the Rockefeller Foundation funded extensive research into acoustics and frequency. Their interest wasn't for music, it was for industrial efficiency and understanding how environmental factors, including sound, influence productivity and emotional states. The timeline clusters. 1939, the conference. 1940, Germany adopts 440 Hz. 1943, occupied territories follow. 1953, European broadcast standards convert. 1955, ISO ratification makes it global. Before 1939, tuning was diverse. Baroque music was performed at 415 Hz or lower. Romantic-era orchestras preferred 435 Hz. Giuseppe Verdi advocated for 432 Hz, arguing it produced a warmer, more natural sound. This wasn't chaos, it was diversity reflecting local preferences and the acoustic properties of performance spaces. After 1939, that diversity ended. Within one generation, no living musician remembered what music felt like before the change. The Nazis wanted 440 Hz, the Rockefeller Foundation funded the research, and ISO standardized it. The past was erased not through destruction, but through replacement. What does changing the frequency actually do?
The human body is approximately 70% water, and water responds to vibration. This is the science of cymatics. If you change the frequency, you change the geometric pattern in the water. Proponents of 432 Hz argue it aligns with natural resonances, such as the Schumann resonance, the Earth's electromagnetic frequency. They claim 432 is a harmonic multiple mathematically coherent with frequencies that surrounded human evolution for millions of years. 440 Hz, however, sits off that harmonic relationship. Historical evidence suggests a preference for the lower range. Ancient temple bells, Egyptian instruments, and Greek lyres often cluster around 432 Hz. Stradivarius violins, when tested, appear designed for a lower tuning. Listeners often report that 432 Hz feels warmer and more calming, while 440 Hz is described as brighter and more aggressive. If music tuned to 440 Hz produces a different emotional state, one that tilts toward tension rather than calm, the choice becomes significant. A population in a state of low-level, constant agitation is easier to manipulate. Anxiety increases consumption, stress reduces critical thinking. The research that could answer these questions is inaccessible. Modern studies attempting to investigate the physiological differences between 432 Hz and 440 Hz are consistently underfunded or dismissed as pseudoscience. When independent researchers find that 432 Hz produces reduced heart rate variability or different brainwave patterns, they are attacked through institutional weight rather than rigorous peer review. Why the hostility to investigation if the difference is truly negligible? We are bathed in 440 Hz constantly now. It is the water we swim in, every recording, every broadcast, every digital instrument. We've been swimming in it for 80 years without being allowed to seriously question if a different frequency might serve us better. The institutions that pushed for it, governments, foundations, and industrial bodies, had deep investments in understanding psychological manipulation. In the 1930s and 40s, psychological warfare divisions investigated how sound could be weaponized to induce fear or compliance. If you go to a music archive today and request pre-1939 recordings, you'll find that remarkably few survived. Most were lost to fire, war, or deterioration. The physical evidence was systematically modified. Even the instruments themselves were often altered during restorations to fit the new 440 Hz standard. Now, those altered instruments are used as evidence that 440 Hz was always the intention. The lived experience of music before 1939 was taken from us. You will likely never hear a major orchestra perform at 432 Hz. You will never know if your emotional baseline would shift or if the music would feel more aligned with natural resonance. That choice was made for you by institutions in 1939, and they insist you shouldn't care. When you realize you'll never know the difference because the reference point was erased, the silence becomes deafening.